I use SketchUp for both illustration and 3D printing projects, and I've designed dozens of things for use in my graphic novel, as well as designed tools and parts for woodworking and DIY projects. But the program, while it still has a free version, has made many changes. Many of them are infuriating. At least one is a deal breaker for many designers, and others, well, one change is absolutely for the better. First of all, the company, when spun off from Google years ago, made all the usual changes to a software company as it goes to a subscription model. They find a new owner, they find a new home, give it a little bit of a new name, and then start charging monthly. I always feel that going to a subscription model is overall bad for consumers in the long run, because if you add up the number of years I've used some of these applications, it becomes especially expensive. It's almost like buying a new car. I know the usual arguments for and against SaaS, software as a service, but for consumers, I feel the net over a lifetime is negative. So what's a bigger deal breaker for many people than having to pay for a subscription? Well, mentioning SketchUp to a professional 3D modeler, especially in the entertainment industry, it's like throwing a piece of raw garlic into the middle of a cheesecake. There are art departments that love SketchUp and pass on models to a Final House or 3D studio or somebody or freelancer. And, well, let's just say very few polygons to survive to the end. The disdain some 3D modelers have for geometry that comes out of SketchUp is really, really harsh. To be fair, I think they have something to say. The geometry that comes out of the app was never meant to be used for generating clean renders. It was meant to serve as something for engineers, industrial designers, and even hobbyists that need the geometry in these cases for something very different. In other words, the geometry engine of SketchUp is more at home communicating dimensions and shapes to engineers who can build the objects. It's not necessarily that you're trying to render the world. You're trying to build something. It's not the same as delivering a clean asset to a render engine to calculate a high resolution image for display for television or advertising or something like that. One of the biggest problems some users have is getting used to the way SketchUp handles discrete elements in 3D. At the lowest level, a point or a vertex simply isn't as important in SketchUp as it is in an individual standalone 3D application. A vertex is the finest level of control over a 3D object's discrete surface, and even programs like Blender give you this level of control. But SketchUp was never meant to be such a granular platform. It was meant to get people building in fundamental shapes as fast as possible, and as easily as possible. It's actually that crude level of detail that makes it perfect for me when I'm working on my graphic novels and some illustrations. I never actually use the final renders. But that said, one of the most infuriating things that has been removed is the layer functionality. No new version of the app since I think 2015 or 2017 has had the ability to make layers and save them with a file. Most 3D programs I use, Maya, Blender, Unreal, even Lightwave back in the day, had some ability to manage complex objects and assemblies with layers. Just like Photoshop in 2D or even Procreate, layers made managing visibility and organization easier. But my workaround to this problem is still available in all versions of SketchUp, working with groups and components. If you're familiar with SketchUp already, you know that there are different ways to create compound collections of different parts or meshes using either groups or components, or a mixture of the two. If I start getting into the weeds of a more complex SketchUp project, anything that I can group easily by function, context, or just for the sake of organization can get grouped and hidden. For some users, this feature also opens up a can of worms. If you tried to hide an object or a face feature in SketchUp, you might have run into the harsh version of transparency. It's not really transparency. This really seems odd to some higher-end CAD users or even users of Maya and Blender. The object, if marked as hidden, can show up as a hashed version. The setting is controlled by SketchUp in different ways. First, hiding objects and geometry types is handled separately. Some of this simplifies selecting discrete surfaces versus individual 3D elements like faces or lines and segments. If you are a veteran Maya user, this distinct geometry difference can be really perplexing. Just get to know the hidden object versus hidden geometry features, and you can largely work around not having layers. It's more steps for sure. But between select all, unselecting all the parts you don't want to hide, and then right-clicking to actually hide the objects, you can work pretty quickly through discrete parts and assemblies. Toggling between show hidden objects visibility Lets you see what you hid, reverse the hiding process, and you're back to full visibility for everything. Components are one of the features still resident in the free versions that helps take the place of instancing features of Maya or Blender or some of those other programs. And in some ways, they're a workaround to parametric dimensioning features of higher-end CAD. Components are stored in the file and are accessible in the side panel of the program. Anything you make, select, and turn into a component gets stored in this panel and can be duplicated throughout your model. You can mix groups and ungrouped geometry into these components, and any change to any instance in your model of a component in the work area updates every other instance of that component everywhere else in the work area. That's pretty useful. In the last desktop version I used, the ability to define a cutting surface, basically a feature that makes holes in anything you want to drop a component onto, still worked. This was handy for updating hundreds of windows on an architectural model, and you can get the usability of this in repetitive assemblies. If layers was the real deal breaker for you, there is one thing about the current free version of SketchUp that I think is beneficial. Files are stored in the cloud, and Trimble, the new company that took over from Google, maintains private storage up to 10 gigabytes of space for the time being, and hopefully they keep that plan alive. I wasn't happy about losing features to subscriptions. I think very few people are, but this still helps a little bit. That said, I use several different versions of the app depending on which computer I'm using. Since I've been using it regularly since about 2014 or so, the free versions of the full app still run on my Surface Pro 4. The version actually isn't supposed to run when I launch it from the desktop icon. A licensing key request appears and seems to lock up the app. But if I double click on a file associated with the app, the program opens normally, and I can at least view and work on my model and make simple changes on a Surface Pro 4. As far as I know, there isn't any other way for Trimble to brick that version, like they can with newer standalone versions of the app that are connected to the internet. One thing I remember people complaining about when they tried to use the browser version of SketchUp with Chrome is that there were old versions of both Chrome and SketchUp that didn't work well together when using hardware acceleration. SketchUp has added its share of generative AI features, but I don't think I'm going to be using those either. They're not available in the free version. I also have free solutions to generative AI that I use at home, namely Comfy UI. So I hope nobody is still struggling or just avoiding SketchUp because of that old issue, especially if you are on a really tight budget and avoided SketchUp in a browser because it was too slow. It would seem an old hindrance that is rendered basically irrelevant by the speed of most graphics cards these days anyway. Comfy UI is a free alternative to a lot of the generative programs out there, and I feel that there are workflows within it that can work fine with Google SketchUp output. So that's it, SketchUp then and now. Frankly, there are a few days where I can't stand SketchUp, but other days when it's totally clutch. That's what the kids say, right? And just like that, I made the word clutch uncool. My work here is done. This is all pretty basic stuff, but I'll get into more advanced topics as time goes by, so help yourself to that free subscription on my newsletter. You get a free comic, and thanks for watching. We'll see you again sometime.